What is nationalism? In order for us to understand the term nationalism, we can look at the context that surrounds it. How can nationalism impact a country? Firstly, it can forge a nation into one unifying body. If the citizens of a country or a nation would develop a true sense of nationalism, they would prioritize and use that as a motivation to build a proper nation that would prioritize their own needs, that would prioritize the development and cultivation of their own culture. According to Alejandro Lichalco, he mentioned that nationalism is not only a power, it's not only a drive, it's not only a motivation for change, but it's also a strategic advantage, a philosophy of power. If the citizens of a nation would develop a true sense of nationalism, they are able to ensure independence and sovereignty because they would understand what methods, what processes should the state undergo in order to develop their nation, to have a better life for everyone. Let's define a few terms that can be confused with nationalism. Firstly, nationalism is not patriotism. Patriotism, to be a patriot, simply you just express love for your country. But that's where it ends. You don't use that love to aspire for change. Nationalism is a source of motivation to acquire the change in one's nation, to improve the conditions of citizens and how they interact in their work, their personal lives, how are they being treated by the state, by the country, are their needs being met? That's what the difference between the two is. Imperialism can stem from nationalism. If a nation has developed a type of nationalism that would prioritize their own needs, they've already achieved. I've satiated the needs of my citizens. Now I want to overpower or expand my influence towards other nations. However, that could be good. That could be good because you're becoming an international type of nation. You're relating with other countries. Maybe trade and business is improving. But where imperialism starts is if you're doing that at the expense of the other nation. You're not you're not considering how it would affect them. Now let's go to the types of nationalism. We have the Barong Tagalog nationalists. According to Claro M. Necto, Barong Tagalog nationalists are superficial and they lack commitment. They're similar to patriots. They would sing the national anthem of the Philippines, they would wear the formal clothing, they would express their culture, but they don't strive for change nor development. They don't speak out on matters that involve their own life within the country. It is not a bad thing, but it's also not a good thing because you're only at the midpoint, not even at the midpoint, below the midpoint. You're simply expressing love, but you're not really putting in the work to achieve a better nation. Because let's be honest, the Philippines, yes. The second type is an internationalist. These prioritize acquisition of foreign relations and power over their own nation. So, let's say foreign trades. If you're met with such conditions, you may have the tendency, or these people may have the tendency, to look over how these trades affect their own country at the expense of profit. Next, we have the hypocritical nationalists. these are different from the Barong Tagalog nationalists because although they present themselves as nationalists, they are very hypocritical. Their words and actions do not match. They might say, I am a true nationalist. I am proud of being a Filipino and I strive for change. But if you look at their actions, not really. No. Hypocritical. Hypocrite. Last is a positive nationalist. So these positive nationalists would generalize many aspects of one nation into one scope. For example, in the Philippines, there are many regions, many provinces, many dialects, many cultures. A positive nationalist would simply generalize all of these differences into a stereotype. For example, all Filipinos are Tagalogs, or the Visayas in Mindanao is what comprise the Philippines, not the Luzon. They just generalize it. They don't consider every single detail. And what you need for a unified nation is to take into account the differences and find a way to unify them, basically. It's very difficult. That's why, well, we'll get into that part of why Filipinos have a hard time with being a true nationalist. Let's go over as nationalism as a philosophy of power. So here, to be a true nationalist, one must continuously care for its nation and to build and thrive in the world. Yes, you don't just stop at wearing the Barong Tagalogs or singing the national anthem, you must actually act on it. True nationalists view the world as a field of nation states. Different countries, different nations, different sources of motivation for their nationalism. If a weak state has weak nationalism, of course, they have a direct relationship. They are incapable of protecting their sovereignty and independence. Independence and nationalism work together, alright? They're interrelated. A nation cannot be independent if its citizens do not possess true nationalism. Evidence A, the Philippines itself. And it's obvious. The following risks. We have exploitation, which is probably the modern equivalent of colonialism in today's society. We get loss of loyalty and respect of Filipinos to the Philippines because they're not true nationalists. They have very weak sense of nationalism. And many Filipinos choose to emigrate. They choose to lose the identity of being a Filipino, their citizenship, in order to, well, can you really blame them? They would like to attain better a better life abroad. So they choose to leave their country. You can't really blame them. Now we move on to the last part. So this man here, the picture is Claro M. Recto. He wrote a book called Nationalism. And his perspective on nationalism is that the reason why we struggle as Filipinos in developing a true sense of nationalism is because of the lingering colonial complex. Well, we were conquered by 3 countries, even more, and some of them stayed more than a decade, more than a century, perhaps, and that could influence the modern Filipinos on how they view being a Filipino. Secondly, the lack of proper education. Many Filipinos do not have the same amount of privilege in attaining proper education, being educated on the history of the Philippines, on how it came to be today, their rights, the knowledge they learn about society, how they view society. And we all know, if you do live in the Philippines, you are quite familiar on how our current president came to be. Well, that's a story for another time. Clara M. Recto also mentioned the concept of Filipinism. That's basically his version of nationalism, but it's, Filipinos plus nationalism, Filipinism. So he refers to this as the undying motivation and drive to protect the Philippines' national interests. The Philippines is number one. We protect our own independence, protect our own rights in the global market, global world. Yeah. So, what do we learn from nationalism? Essentially, it's just the drive for a nation to become better, to earn a better life for everyone. You know, when you walk down the streets and you finally don't see the effects of poverty on people, the unjust deaths. If you are a true nationalist, you would strive for change. Yeah, it's a very interesting topic. Could be used to a strategic advantage, but we all know the crab mentality in the Philippines, and it is very difficult for Filipinos to develop, to foster a sense of nationalism if the society and the government itself prevents that development. It's basically like the 19th century all over again. Yeah, nationalism. Reference Nationalism by Clara M. Recto. Oh, you could also check out Alejandro de Chalco. He also wrote a book about nationalism. That's where he mentioned that nationalism could be a strategy for power. That's it.